For months, astronomers had watched 31/ATLAS glide through the dark, expecting nothing unusual. It was catalogued, tracked, and quietly logged as another frozen wanderer from the outer reaches. But as it drew closer to the inner solar system, something began to feel wrong. Its behavior broke every rule in the book. The tail that should have trailed behind it bent at impossible angles. Light from the core flickered in clean, rhythmic bursts, and its motion through space refused to follow the natural curve of gravity. It was as if the object had a mind of its own. Then came the final image, one frame, one capture, before 31/ATLAS vanished into the black. That single picture overturned years of assumptions and sent shockwaves through every major observatory on Earth. The data was unmistakable. This was not a comet made of ice and dust. It was a structured object, something built, deliberate, and controlled. The story of 31/ATLAS had ended, but what it left behind was far more than a mystery. It was evidence that our understanding of what drifts between the stars had just changed forever. Its journey began like many others. In late 2024, the Atlas survey in Hawaii picked up a faint, slow-moving object entering the solar system. The discovery announcement was routine. Another long-period comet, harmless and predictable. Its orbit was charted, its light measured, its path traced against the background stars. But almost immediately, the numbers stopped matching expectations. The light curve, instead of brightening gradually as sunlight struck its surface, began to pulse in intervals, steady, repeating, almost like a coded transmission. Astronomers first assumed instrumental error, maybe a calibration glitch, until independent observatories on 3 continents confirmed the same pattern. The brightness rose and fell with clockwork precision. Comets do not flicker on schedule. At the same time, orbital models revealed subtle but undeniable changes. 31/ATLAS was adjusting its course. These were not gravitational drifts or solar wind pushes. They were sharp, controlled deviations, shifts in velocity that looked intentional. Across the astronomical community, quiet emails and encrypted calls began to circulate. No one wanted to say it aloud, but the conclusion was clear. The object was steering. By December, the anomaly had become impossible to ignore. Amateur astronomers noticed strange irregularities in its tail. Instead of a smooth, gaseous flow, the plume appeared segmented, as if composed of separate emissions fired from fixed points. Some images revealed faint lines forming near-perfect symmetry, like a grid of exhaust vents glowing within the haze. The geometry was too clean, too deliberate to be random. It didn't behave like a comet, and it didn't look like one either. Comparisons to Oumuamua surfaced quickly. That interstellar visitor had puzzled scientists in 2017 when it accelerated mysteriously without any visible jets or debris. Harvard's Avi Loeb had famously proposed that it might be artificial. Now, years later, 31/ATLAS seemed to be proving him right. But where Oumuamua sped up, this new object did the opposite. It was slowing down. No natural comet ever does that. For the first time, astronomers weren't watching a visitor just pass through the solar system. They were watching one that might have decided to stop. Every new observation deepened the unease. Infrared scans failed to match any known composition of ice, dust, or carbon compounds. The tail's emissions fluctuated with precision, not chaos. It was as if someone or something had programmed it. And yet there it was, gliding through the solar system as the world's telescopes turned toward it in disbelief. The realization settled slowly. 31/ATLAS was not behaving like an object shaped by physics, but like a craft responding to it. Then the James Webb Space Telescope took aim. Its mirrors locked onto the coordinates during the object's closest approach. Over several days, Webb captured high-resolution data across multiple wavelengths. For weeks, NASA kept those images under review, and rumors began to spread among engineers that the results were unlike anything ever seen. When the final composite image was released, the silence in the control room said everything. The nucleus, what was supposed to be a jagged lump of frozen rock, showed symmetry. Straight lines, sharp edges, flat reflective surfaces, panels that caught sunlight and reflected it in organized intervals. The shape wasn't round, it wasn't rough, and it wasn't random. It had form, purpose, and pattern. When layered and enhanced, the data revealed repeating angular geometry running across its surface. It looked engineered. What was once thought to be a relic of the solar system's birth was now something entirely different, a constructed object masquerading as a comet. Scientists struggled to explain it within natural bounds, but the evidence had no ordinary solution. Every pixel of Webb's image whispered the same truth. 31/ATLAS was not drifting through space by chance. It was moving by design. The mystery of 31/ATLAS deepened beyond anything scientists had prepared for. The data arriving from the James Webb Space Telescope was not noise, not error, and not illusion. What astronomers had at first mistaken for a dying comet was now unmistakably showing the behavior of something designed. The plumes of gas, once thought to be outgassing, were uniform, symmetrical, and timed. Each burst appeared to originate from fixed points on the surface, perfectly spaced as if aligned along an engineered grid. The exhaust trails didn't match ice sublimation patterns or random venting. They behaved like propulsion, clean even and deliberate. The object wasn't drifting through space. It was steering. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the first reaction was disbelief. Engineers cross-checked every model, every reading, every frame of data. But the more they verified, the stranger it became. The temperature readings across the surface were steady, not fluctuating as they would on a rotating, sun-heated comet. The heat signatures were too consistent, suggesting active thermal regulation. And the acceleration patterns followed a rhythm, slight controlled boosts that kept it precisely on course. There was no chaos, no randomness, only precision. The official statement to the public called it unusual outgassing, a phrase chosen carefully to avoid panic. But within NASA, the phrase became a quiet joke. Everyone knew outgassing couldn't explain thrust in two opposite directions at once. Whistleblowers began to leak fragments of internal reports. Words like propulsion symmetry and coordinated emissions began to appear in classified notes. For the first time in human history, the question of whether an interstellar object could be artificial was no longer theoretical. It was an engineering problem waiting for confirmation. Then came the frame that changed everything. The last image captured before 31/ATLAS slipped beyond Webb's line of sight. In that frozen moment, the object released a sharp flash, bright enough to saturate multiple detectors. At first, it was dismissed as a reflection, sunlight bouncing off ice crystals. But once analysts began breaking down the light curve, the pattern shattered that explanation. The flash was timed. Its peaks and troughs repeated in precise intervals, spaced by the same durations each time. The discovery spread through observatories around the world like electricity. The flash wasn't random, and it wasn't noise. When plotted, the intervals matched prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, the universal mathematical fingerprint of intelligence. Across 5 different instruments, the same signal emerged. An intentional sequence of light pulses perfectly aligned across time. Webb hadn't just captured a reflection, it had recorded a transmission. Humanity was staring at the first structured message ever received from beyond Earth. Teams at the European Space Agency and MIT worked through the night to verify the finding. No natural phenomenon produces such a pattern. Comets can flicker, yes, but only as their spin reveals or hides active areas, never in exact mathematical rhythm. The timing of the pulses, their spacing, and the consistency of the repetition all pointed to artificial control. The data was overwhelming. 31/ATLAS had flashed a code, a universal declaration that something out there knew the language of numbers. Within weeks, researchers found something even more disturbing hidden in the emission spectra. Embedded in the reflected light were faint modulations, signals that looked eerily similar to radio transmissions but piggybacked on photons instead of electromagnetic waves. Using AI-assisted decoding, analysts reconstructed these variations into an image. At first, it was just a blur. Then, as layers were enhanced and aligned, a shape appeared. It was a circle, pale, blue, faint, surrounded by concentric dark rings. When calibrated against planetary reflectivity data, there was no doubt. It was Earth. The object hadn't just signaled, it had sent a picture. The blue sphere we call home, rendered as if seen from the edge of the solar system, enclosed by dark bands that tightened like a cage. For a moment, the entire control room fell silent. The interpretations split the world in two. Some believed it was a greeting, a mathematical handshake followed by recognition. Others saw a warning, or worse, surveillance. The image's framing looked too deliberate, the shadowing too heavy to be coincidence. The message was undeniable. 31/ATLAS had been observing us. The only question was why. In the hours that followed, every major observatory on Earth turned its instruments toward the departing object. But by then, it had begun to accelerate again. After weeks of slow deceleration and maneuvering, it ignited a new burn, sharp and clean, changing course and climbing away from the inner solar system. The trajectory wasn't random. It followed a precise vector that avoided all known planets and carried it toward the outer dark. It wasn't falling, it was leaving. NASA's orbital dynamics team ran simulations for days trying to fit the acceleration into known physical models. None worked. No comet could move that fast against solar gravity without disintegrating. The only way to explain it was active thrust. Something aboard 31/ATLAS was controlling its path. It had entered the solar system, lingered just long enough to observe, then powered away on its own terms. Theories exploded across scientific circles. Some saw it as a probe, an ancient vessel built to explore and record civilizations. Others whispered darker ideas that it was a scout, a reconnaissance drone cataloging potential targets. The flash of prime numbers could have been a handshake or a signal to something else far beyond our reach. The image of Earth could have been identification or coordinates. The debate turned philosophical, even spiritual. Had we been contacted or merely marked? Inside government briefings, the language was careful. Anomalous non-gravitational acceleration. Artificial symmetry in emission patterns. Possible technological origin. Publicly, officials said nothing. Privately, they convened emergency committees. The fear wasn't invasion, it was exposure. For the first time, humanity knew for certain that it had been observed. Even now, months after the signal faded, the raw Webb data continues to yield fragments of information. Subtle polarization shifts suggest metallic surfaces rather than rock. Light scatter analysis points to hexagonal paneling across the hull, patterns consistent with solar collectors or sensors. The structure that once looked like a comet's nucleus now reads more like a vessel covered in reflective arrays. The idea that 31/ATLAS was a machine no longer sounds like science fiction. It is engineering written in light. The propulsion signatures, the controlled burns, the mathematical flash, all the evidence points to intent. It came from the dark, paused to watch, sent its message, and departed before we could react. What it wanted remains unknown. Maybe it was searching for other minds, just as we once sent Voyager carrying our golden record into space. Or maybe it was measuring us, noting our progress, our technology, our vulnerability. The truth may never be known, but one fact stands above the rest. 31/ATLAS shattered the illusion that we are alone. The night sky now feels different. Every point of light could be more than a star. Every comet could be something built, not born. The discovery forces humanity to ask new questions about the universe and its inhabitants, questions we once feared to say aloud. In its wake, 31/ATLAS left behind data, mystery, and a haunting certainty. We were seen. The object that once passed for a comet had purpose, precision, and design. And as it fades into the endless dark, humanity is left with one realization. Our search for other worlds may have just been answered, not with a signal we sent, but with a silent visitor who already knew we were here.